The Texas sun in August burned without mercy. At the Black Rock Ranch, the air shimmered with heat, creating mirages above the scorched grass. Dust rose with every movement, and the pens were quiet except for the occasional lowing of cattle. Even the most experienced cowboys who had worked with animals their whole lives preferred to stay away from this place. The reason was simple. Two beings lived here that everyone in the area feared. John Clayton, at 58, was a living legend of Texas rodeo. In his youth, his name was famous in the biggest arenas across the country, from Houston to Dallas. He could stay on any bull, no matter how wild it was. The crowd held its breath when John entered the arena, tall with piercing gray eyes and a grip of steel. But one moment changed everything. During the state championship, a bull named Tornado threw him into the arena fence in a terrible way. The crack of breaking bones was heard even by the people in the top rows. After that injury, John was left with a permanent limp, and his dreams of continuing his career turned to ashes. The pain that pierced his back every morning made John cruel and unbending. He believed that only strength and strictness could make the world obey, and he applied that rule to everyone around him. The ranch workers knew it was best not to argue with the boss. His word was law, and disobedience was punished with immediate firing. John ruled his land with an iron hand, never allowing any weakness or softness. The only bright spot in his hardened life was his 10-year-old daughter, Sarah. The blonde girl with sky blue eyes had inherited from her late mother not only her looks, but also a kind, gentle heart. Maria, John's wife, had died 3 years ago from heart disease, and since then, the rancher had become even more closed and strict. But he worshipped his daughter. He would do anything for her, including showing rare moments of tenderness that no one else ever saw. Sarah was the only person who could make him smile. The second real nightmare of the ranch was a bull named Thunder. Black as a Texas night, the giant weighed over 1,300 pounds, with horns sharp enough to pierce steel. His muscles moved under his shiny skin like steel cables, and his small red eyes burned with such fury that even seasoned cowboys looked away. When Thunder was in a bad mood, his roar echoed across the whole ranch, making the other animals huddle in the far corners of their pens. For 3 years, this beast had turned life on the ranch into a non-stop nightmare, creating an atmosphere of constant fear and tension. Thunder's first victim was a young worker, Tom Harris, a 20-year-old guy from a nearby town. He tried to load the bull into a transport trailer for the fair. Thunder tolerated the ropes and shouting, but when Tom tried to push him with a cattle prod, the bull exploded. He threw the young man so high that he flew across the entire pen and hit the opposite wall. Tom spent 3 months in the hospital with several broken ribs and a concussion. After he was discharged, he refused to return to the ranch, even though the pay was good. The next victim was Hank Morrison, an experienced livestock trainer with 30 years of work behind him. Hank believed he could handle any animal and decided to show Thunder who was boss. He entered the pen with a whip and a lasso, planning to teach the bull to obey. But Thunder wasn't going to give in. The bull cornered Hank and began breaking his ribs, hitting him hard with his powerful head. Only the screams for help and the quick action of other workers saved the trainer from death. Hank survived, but he gave up working with dangerous large animals forever. The list of Thunder's victims kept growing at a frightening pace. Every new worker who came to the ranch eventually tried to prove their courage by facing the legendary bull. And every time, it ended in a hospital visit or, at best, a shameful retreat. The most recent one hurt was Mike Stevens, the best cowboy in the whole county, a man who could ride any horse and control the wildest herd. Mike decided he could tame Thunder using old-school methods, patience and persistence. He spent several hours a day in the pen with the bull, trying to get the animal used to his presence. At first, it looked like the plan was working. Thunder ignored the cowboy and did his own thing, but it was false calm. One day when Mike bent down to fix the water trough, the bull attacked him without warning. Thunder trapped him in a corner and began kicking him with his hooves. By some miracle, Mike survived. Other workers managed to distract the bull by firing shots into the air. Now Mike limps on his right leg and swore never to go near that demon again. After that incident, the workers fed Thunder by pushing hay through specially widened gaps in the fence. Water was poured into his trough from a long hose, with the person standing at a safe distance from the pen. No one dared to enter the bull's territory anymore. John understood that Thunder had become a real curse for the ranch, but he absolutely refused to sell him. This bull was a symbol of John's own unbreakable will, his pride, and his challenge to the whole world. If I couldn't break one bull, then what kind of rancher am I? He thought, looking at the black giant. That hot August morning, as the sun was just rising over the horizon, painting the sky in pink and orange tones, old Sam Johnson was doing his usual morning rounds. The 70-year-old cowboy had worked on the ranch for over 20 years and knew every corner of the land. His job was to check all the buildings for damage or signs of wild animals breaking in. In a distant shed, among old sacks of grain, rusty tools, and cobwebs, he noticed something strange. In the corner, curled up between the sacks, lay a child. It was a boy, about 7 years old, no more. Thin as a stick, with ribs showing and sunken cheeks. He looked like a skeleton wrapped in skin. His clothes hung off him like a scarecrow. A torn t-shirt that was once white, and jeans with holes at the knees. His face was covered in a layer of dirt, and his messy dark hair stuck out in all directions. It was clear the child hadn't eaten properly in a long time, hadn't bathed, and had been sleeping outside. His arms and legs were covered in scrapes and bruises, marks of a hard life on the streets. When Sam called out to him, the boy woke up and instinctively scooted backward, pressing himself against the wall of the shed. In his big dark eyes was the fear of a wild animal, ready to run at the first sign of danger. He was shaking, whether from the chill of the morning air or from fear of the strange adult wasn't clear. His eyes darted around the shed, looking for a way to escape. Sam realized that any sudden move might scare the boy off, so he carefully crouched down, trying to appear less threatening. Sam led the boy to the main house, where John, as usual, was drinking his morning coffee on the wide wooden porch. The rancher sat in his favorite rocking chair, reading the morning paper's cattle price report. When he saw Sam with the homeless boy, John frowned and set the newspaper aside. His gray eyes narrowed, and his face took on the familiar look of cold sternness that all the workers knew well. Stray wanderers and beggars often wandered onto the ranch, and John had a strict rule. Don't feed them, and send them off the property immediately. "Where'd this ragamuffin come from?" he asked sharply, getting up from his chair. His voice was harsh, allowing no argument. The boy pressed even closer to Sam, instinctively sensing the hostility in the man's tone. His small hands clutched the old cowboy's sleeve like a lifeline. Sam could feel the child's body trembling, and his heart ached with pity. In his long life, he had seen many unfortunate souls, but this child looked especially helpless. "Speak up. Where are your parents? How did you get here?" John raised his voice, and stepping forward. The boy only shook his head and didn't say a word. His lips were tightly pressed together, and tears filled his eyes, which he tried hard to hold back. It was clear that he was terrified and didn't trust adults. Maybe in his short life, he had already seen cruelty and indifference, enough to teach him to stay silent and hide. "Get out of here now," John barked, pointing toward the road. "I've got a daughter growing up. This isn't a place for beggars and strays. Off my land before I call the sheriff." At that moment, the front door of the house burst open, and Sarah ran out onto the porch, having heard her father's loud voice. The girl was wearing a nightgown, her blonde hair messy from sleep, and soft slippers on her feet. Seeing the frightened boy, who looked even younger than she was, Sarah immediately ran up to him, ignoring her father's angry shouts. Her big heart couldn't stand the sight of a suffering child. "Daddy, he's just a little boy. Look how scared he is," she cried, standing between her father and the stranger. She took the boy's hand, and he didn't pull away, sensing the honest kindness in her gesture. Right behind her came Mary Johnson, the elderly cook with a kind heart and gray hair tied in a neat bun. She had worked on the ranch for over 15 years and was almost part of the family. Mary had seen a lot in her long life, but the sight of a hungry child always touched her motherly heart. She looked over the boy with an experienced eye, immediately understanding how starved and exhausted he was. "John, at least let the child eat," Mary said gently but firmly. "Look at how thin he is. He probably hasn't had a proper meal in days. And he looks really sick." John stared at the boy with growing irritation, but seeing his beloved daughter standing up for a stranger softened him a little. He knew Sarah had inherited her mother's kind heart and compassion for those in need. Memories of his late wife briefly softened the harsh look on his face. One night, he muttered at last, "He's gone in the morning. No favors. He eats, sleeps, and then gets out." Mary immediately took the boy to the kitchen and sat him at the big wooden table where the ranch workers usually ate. She made him a bowl of hot oatmeal with milk, added honey and butter, sliced fresh bread, and poured a glass of cold milk. The boy ate silently but greedily, as if afraid the food would be taken away at any second. His thin hands trembled as he brought the spoon to his mouth. When asked his name, where he came from, or where his parents were, the boy only shook his head. It was clear that the child had been through something terrible and was afraid to speak to strangers. Maybe in his short life he had already experienced betrayal or cruelty, which had taught him not to trust anyone. Sarah stayed close to him all day, trying to cheer him up and make him feel safe. She showed him her toys, talked about the animals on the ranch, and even offered to go swimming in the pond behind the house. When night came, Mary set up a fold-out bed for the boy in a small pantry next to the kitchen. The room was tiny, but warm and cozy, with shelves full of jars of jam and sacks of flour. The smell of spices and homemade pastries gave the place a feeling of comfort and safety. Everyone in the house fell asleep, and the usual nighttime peace settled over the ranch, broken only by the chirping of crickets, distant lowing of cattle, and the rustling of wind in the old oak trees. But the boy couldn't sleep. Something kept pulling him outside, a blurry memory or a silent call he didn't understand, but couldn't ignore either. Images from the past flickered in his mind. A gentle woman's voice, the smell of cookies, warm hands stroking his head. He quietly got up from the cot and tiptoed out of the house through the back door. The Texas night was warm and starry, the sky sprinkled with diamond-like stars. The air smelled of hay, dust, and faraway thunderstorms. The boy wandered across the ranch as if led by an invisible force. His bare feet moved quietly over the packed dirt, avoiding puddles and stones. He passed the stables, where the horses were softly snoring, walked by the chicken coop and the sheep pen. Finally, his feet brought him to the far pen, where a huge shape stood in the shadows. Thunder. The massive figure of the bull loomed in the dark like a black mountain. Thunder wasn't asleep. The giant bull stood in the middle of the pen, slowly chewing hay, his eyes glowing faintly red in the darkness. Every so often he snorted or shifted his weight, making the ground shake under him. When the boy came closer to the fence, Thunder raised his massive head and stared straight at the small figure. For a few seconds they looked at each other in complete silence. "Thunder," the boy whispered, reaching a hand toward the fence. The bull's reaction was instant and terrifying. The familiar rage lit up in Thunder's red eyes. He scraped the ground with his hooves, kicking up clouds of dust, and let out a roar so loud it sent birds flying from the nearby trees. The sound was so powerful and threatening, it echoed all over the ranch, bouncing off the buildings. Thunder lowered his head, aiming his sharp horns forward, and began moving slowly toward the fence, each step shaking the earth. The sound woke up the entire house. John jumped out of bed, grabbed the rifle hanging by his bed, and ran outside barefoot. Behind him came Sam and the other workers, stumbling and shouting, carrying flashlights and torches. Everyone knew, if Thunder was roaring in the middle of the night, something serious had happened. Maybe thieves had broken in, or wild animals had come onto the land. "What's going on? Who's there?" John shouted, waving his rifle and trying to see something in the darkness. But when the beams of their flashlights fell on Thunder's pen, everyone froze at the sight in front of them. Standing right at the fence was the same stray boy they had fed and sheltered for the night, and just a few steps away from him, on the other side of the fence, slowly approached an enraged Thunder. The bull snorted and growled, his nostrils flaring with fury, his hooves pounding the ground. His sharp horns were aimed straight at the helpless child. "Stop! "Don't move an inch," John shouted at the top of his lungs, aiming his rifle at the bull. "That bull will kill you. He'll tear you to pieces." Sam grabbed his head in disbelief. "The boy's gonna die. Thunder's gonna crush him. We need to shoot, boss. Shoot now." Mary ran out of the house in her nightgown and slippers. When she saw what was happening, she gasped and clutched her hands to her chest. Sarah tried to run toward the boy, but John held her tightly with one arm, not letting go of the rifle in his other hand. "Don't you dare," he hissed at his daughter. "One dead body is enough. Stay here." Thunder was now right at the fence. Only the wooden railing stood between him and the boy, a barrier that, for a bull his size, was more symbolic than real. His massive nostrils flared as he sniffed the unfamiliar scent. Everyone froze, bracing for the tragedy they felt was coming. John kept his finger on the trigger, ready to fire the moment the bull tried to break or leap over the fence. Seconds dragged on like hours. Thunder stood almost nose to nose with the fence, his hot breath forming little clouds in the cool night air. The boy didn't move. He just stared straight into the bull's eyes. There was no fear in his gaze, only a strange sadness and understanding. Then something unbelievable happened. Thunder suddenly froze. His aggressive posture slowly began to change. He stopped pawing the ground and snorting threateningly. The bull lowered his huge head, sniffed again, and the look in his small red eyes changed. The fury faded, replaced first by confusion, then something that looked like recognition. Very slowly, very gently, Thunder pushed his massive muzzle toward the fence. The boy didn't back away. He raised his small hand and touched the bull's black, wet nose. The touch was soft, almost weightless. Thunder stayed still, then let out a quiet snort and gently nudged his nose into the boy's open palm. The boy began to slowly stroke Thunder's muzzle, and the bull made a sound no one on the ranch had ever heard. A quiet, contented lowing, more like the purr of a giant cat. It was the exact opposite of his usual terrifying roar. The bull closed his eyes in pleasure, leaning his head into the gentle petting. "What the hell?" Sam whispered, dropping his flashlight in disbelief. John lowered the rifle, his mouth wide open in shock. In over 30 years of working with animals, through all his rodeo days and years of farming, he had never seen anything like this. It went against all laws of nature and common sense. Thunder, who had injured grown men, was peacefully letting a 7-year-old child pet him. "How is this possible?" he yelled, rushing toward the pen. "What kind of witchcraft is this?" The boy turned at the sound of his voice and looked at the angry farmer with a guilty expression. In his large dark eyes was a silent apology. He understood that he had broken the rules and woken everyone up. Thunder, meanwhile, stood calmly by the fence, softly lowing and nudging the boy's hand for more affection. "Step away from him right now," John ordered, but the certainty in his voice was gone. What he had just seen didn't fit into any world he knew. The boy obediently stepped back from the fence. Thunder watched him go with sad eyes, letting out sounds that almost sounded like goodbye. The huge bull stood there for a long time afterward, staring in the direction the boy had gone, as if hoping he would come back. No one could sleep for the rest of the night. The workers gathered in the kitchen and talked in hushed tones, whispering and making wild guesses. Some spoke of magic. Others remembered old legends about people who could speak with animals. Mary made tea several times, but the cups sat untouched. Everyone was too shaken to think about food or drink. John sat silently on the porch in his favorite rocking chair, thinking hard about what had just happened. He tried to come up with a logical explanation, but every idea ran into the simple truth. Thunder, who had attacked everyone without exception, had willingly let a strange child pet him. Even more, the bull had clearly enjoyed it. When the first rays of sunlight painted the eastern sky pink, John made a decision. He had to find out the truth about the mysterious boy, who he was, where he came from, and why Thunder reacted to him that way. The rancher was starting to suspect there was some kind of bond between the child and the bull, a bond he didn't yet understand. That morning, John held a full-blown interrogation. He sat the boy across from him at the massive oak table in the living room, turned on all the lights, and stared straight into his eyes. His voice was strict and left no room for dodging. the same tone he used with troublemakers on the ranch or dishonest cattle dealers. "Who are you? What's your name?" he began. "How do you know our bull? Tell the truth, boy. I saw there's something between you two." The boy sat silently, eyes downcast, fidgeting with the torn edge of his shirt. He shook his head at every question, but didn't say a word. It was clear he was afraid to speak. Maybe someone had told him not to talk about his past, or maybe he just didn't trust adults. "Speak up now!" John raised his voice, slamming his fist on the table. "I saw it with my own eyes. You know each other. Thunder doesn't act like that with strangers." At that moment, Mary spoke up. The elderly woman had spent the whole morning with a strange feeling that the boy's face looked familiar. She studied his features carefully, trying to figure out where she might have seen him before. Something about the shape of his eyes, the curve of his eyebrows. It felt painfully familiar. Suddenly, it hit her, and her eyes widened in shock. "Hold on, John," she said slowly, walking closer to the boy. "This child reminds me of someone. Let me take a better look at him." Mary walked over to the old oak cabinet where the family kept their photographs and papers. She dug through the albums and documents until she found what she was looking for. A small photo in a worn frame. In the black and white picture was a young woman in her 30s with soft dark hair and kind eyes. She was holding a small child, no older than 2. The photo had been taken right here in the ranch yard, with the familiar buildings in the background. "Oh my goodness," Mary gasped, comparing the boy's face to the child in the photo. "It's Emma's little boy." "Look, John, it's him!" John took the photo in his trembling hands and studied it closely. The resemblance was striking. The same dark eyes, the same shape of the lips. Even the mole on his left cheek was in the same spot. Despite the years that had passed since the photo was taken, and the exhaustion that had changed the boy's face, it was impossible not to recognize him. Emma Rodriguez had worked as a cook at Black Rock Ranch 5 years ago. She was a quiet, hard-working woman of Mexican origin who made the best tortillas in the county and could calm down any upset child. Emma was a single mother. The boy's father had disappeared before he was born, leaving the young woman to face life's hardships alone. When she had no one to leave the boy with, she sometimes brought him along to work. Back then, the boy was just a toddler, barely able to walk. He would play in the yard for hours while his mother worked in the kitchen. Emma never bothered anyone, did her job diligently, and never asked for special treatment. Everyone on the ranch loved her for her kindness and amazing cooking. Even the tough John treated her with respect, a rare thing for a man like him. But more than anything, the little boy loved watching the animals. He could sit by the pens for hours, watching the cows, horses, and calves. Emma used to say that at home, her son always asked her to read animal books and would draw them with colored pencils. He especially loved the smallest animals, kittens, puppies, calves. With them, he showed amazing patience and care. Emma died 2 years ago from pneumonia, John recalled sadly. She was sick for a long time, but didn't want to go to a doctor. Said she couldn't afford it. By the time we found out, it was too late. But where was the boy all this time? Why didn't he come to us earlier? As it turned out later, after his mother's death, the boy was taken in by a distant aunt named Consuelo, who lived in a poor neighborhood in the nearby town of Laredo. The woman was bitter and angry at the world, living off welfare and counting every cent. She agreed to take in her nephew only because social services promised her a monthly payment for his care. Consuelo quickly figured out that the money would cover the boy's food and still leave a little extra for herself. From the first day, Consuelo made it clear that the boy wasn't wanted. Every piece of bread he ate, she reminded him, was taken from her own children. She forced him to work around the house from morning until night, scrubbing floors, doing laundry, looking after the younger kids. For any mistake, she beat him with a belt or locked him in a dark closet without food. The boy endured months of abuse and humiliation as long as he could. But when his aunt started talking about sending him to an orphanage or even selling him off as a laborer, he couldn't take it anymore. One August night, while the whole family was asleep, the 7-year-old boy gathered his few belongings into an old pillowcase and escaped through the window. For a while, he wandered the roads, eating whatever he could find in trash bins, sleeping in abandoned sheds and under bridges. The only thing that kept him going was the blurry memory of the ranch where his mother had worked, of kind people, and a place that had once felt like home. And one day those memories led the boy to John's ranch. "What's your name, sweetheart?" Mary asked gently, sitting next to the boy and taking his hand. "Luke," the boy said quietly, in a hoarse voice, the first words he had spoken since arriving at the ranch. Speaking was unfamiliar to him. At his aunt's house, children were not allowed to talk without permission. "Luke," John repeated after him, his voice softening slightly. "Luke Rodriguez. And you remember our ranch?" The boy nodded shyly, studying the faces of the adults, trying to figure out if they were angry with him. "And do you remember Thunder?" John continued. "He was small," Luke answered quietly. "When Mama brought me here, he was just a tiny calf. I helped feed him with a big bottle. Mama showed me how to do it." Suddenly, everything made sense. Thunder had recognized the scent and voice of the boy who had cared for him during the first months of his life. Animals, especially smart ones like bulls, can remember kindness for a very long time, sometimes forever. To Thunder, Luke wasn't a stranger. He was part of his earliest and happiest memories, connected to warmth, care, and safety. At that moment, a messy-haired Sarah ran into the living room. The girl had worried all night about the boy and had been waiting near the door all morning for news of her father's conversation with the stranger. Hearing the name Luke, she ran to her father and tugged on his sleeve. "Daddy, can we keep Luke now?" she asked hopefully. "He's not a stranger. He's one of us. He remembers Mama Emma and our ranch." John looked at his daughter, then at the thin, tired boy, then toward the pen where Thunder's figure could be seen. The bull was standing in the same spot by the fence where he had met the child the night before, as if waiting for him to return. Something stirred in the tough rancher's chest. Maybe memories of his own childhood, or maybe a late-coming sense of guilt about Emma, who he hadn't been able to help during her terrible illness. "All right," he said at last after a long pause. "You can stay, Luke, but I have one condition. No going near Thunder without my permission. That bull is still dangerous, even if he remembers you." Luke nodded happily, and for the first time in many months, a shy smile appeared on his tired face. Sarah clapped her hands in delight and immediately began making plans to show her new friend all the most interesting places on the ranch. And so, Luke stayed at the Clayton Ranch. He was given a small room under the staircase, tiny but warm, with a single little window and a simple bed. Mary took it upon herself to help the boy regain his strength. She cooked him nutritious meals, made sure he got enough sleep, and slowly started teaching him to read and write. John gave Luke chores around the ranch suited to his age, feeding the chickens, collecting eggs, helping Mary in the garden. The boy completed every task with amazing effort and gratitude. After the hard life he had endured at his aunt's house, even regular work on the ranch seemed easy and enjoyable. Sarah was overjoyed to have a little brother, because that's how she now introduced Luke to everyone. She eagerly showed him every corner of the ranch, told him family stories, and shared her childhood secrets. For the first time in her life, she had a true friend, someone to play with and talk to about anything. But the biggest change happened in Thunder's behavior. The giant bull seemed to have transformed overnight. He still wouldn't let strangers near and could show his temper to anyone who approached his pen without respect. But the random aggression was gone. The ranch workers noticed that the animal had become noticeably calmer. He no longer slammed into the pen walls, growled at everyone who passed by, or tried to break the fence. Luke visited Thunder every day now, but officially, with John's permission and under adult supervision. The boy brought the bull treats, fresh apples, carrots, sometimes pieces of sugar. He would stand at the fence for a long time, quietly talking to the huge animal about his childhood thoughts and worries. Thunder listened with his massive head lowered, and it felt like he understood every word. Dr. Carter, the veterinarian who had been serving the ranch for over 20 years, was amazed by the changes in Thunder's behavior. This gray-haired man with kind eyes and gentle hands had seen many remarkable things during his career, but the bond between the boy and the bull went beyond anything he had ever imagined. In 20 years of working with cattle, "I've never seen anything like this," he told John, watching Luke scratch behind Thunder's ear through the fence bars. "That boy has a special gift. Animals sense something in him that most people don't have." The months passed peacefully and steadily. Luke began attending the local school with Sarah, quickly catching up on his education. Despite his hard past, the boy turned out to be a capable student with a sharp mind and good memory. The teacher often praised him for his diligence and thirst for knowledge. After school, the children helped with chores, and every evening, Luke would go to visit Thunder. It became a kind of ritual. The boy would tell the bull about his day, what he'd learned at school, and share his small joys and worries. Thunder listened quietly, sometimes letting out a soft low or gently nudging the boy's hand with his nose. The bull became so calm and predictable that even the other ranch workers stopped being afraid of him. Of course, they still treated him with respect and caution. After all, he was a huge, powerful animal with sharp horns. But the constant fear and tension that had hung over the ranch for the past few years had completely lifted. However, the family's happiness was threatened by a serious problem that John preferred not to speak of out loud. Black Rock Ranch was going through a deep financial crisis. The drought from the previous year had severely damaged the pastures and hayfields, forcing them to buy feed at inflated prices. An outbreak of an unknown illness had taken the lives of nearly 30 head of cattle, dealing a crushing blow to the farm's income. On top of that came equipment issues. The main tractor had broken down, the irrigation pumps needed replacement, and the roof of the main barn leaked so badly that they had to constantly move the hay to keep it dry. The bank was demanding repayment of the loan John had taken 3 years ago for ranch improvements, and they were now threatening to seize the property if payments continued to be late. John spent sleepless nights over bills and paperwork, trying to find a way out of the financial hole. He considered selling part of the land, reducing the herd, even laying off some workers. But all these measures would only buy time. They wouldn't solve the core issue. The ranch needed serious investment to become profitable again. One cool October day, as yellow leaves swirled in the air, signaling the arrival of winter, a black luxury pickup truck with chrome trim and a leather interior pulled up to the ranch. Out stepped a man in his 50s, dressed in expensive cowboy attire, handmade leather boots, designer jeans, and a hat that cost more than a ranch worker's monthly pay. It was Bill Hunter, owner of the largest ranch in the state. Golden Horseshoe, a man of great wealth and influence. His land stretched across tens of thousands of acres, and his cattle numbered in the thousands. Hunter was known for his tough business style and talent for buying out other people's problems for pennies, only to turn them into profitable enterprises. "John, old friend," he said, extending a hand, though they had never truly been friends. "I heard you've got a special bull here. They say he's a real beast. Won't let anyone near him. I want to buy him for my breeding collection." John tensed as soon as he heard Hunter's intentions. He knew the man's reputation. Hunter never bought anything without a plan. He always had his own calculations. Besides, selling Thunder now, after the bond that had formed between the bull and Luke, felt almost like betrayal. "Thunder's not for sale, Bill," John said firmly, crossing his arms. "Don't rush to answer," Hunter said with a sly smile. "I'm ready to offer $75,000. Cash. Right now. No delays. No bank paperwork." It was a massive amount. With that money, John could not only pay off all his debts, but also completely upgrade the ranch, buy new equipment, restore the cattle herd. It was enough to solve all the family's financial problems and secure a comfortable future for Sarah and Luke. "Think about it, John," Hunter kept pressing. "To you, he's just a bull, even if a special one. But to me, he's the chance to build a unique breeding line. Besides, I've heard you're having some financial trouble." Just then, Luke ran into the yard. He'd been playing hide-and-seek with Sarah behind the house and heard unfamiliar voices. Curious, he came to see who had arrived. When he saw the well-dressed man standing beside the farmer, Luke ran up to them with innocent curiosity. "Mr. Clayton, are you going to sell Thunder?" he asked anxiously, having guessed the conversation's topic from the adults' expressions. "Adults are talking. Go inside," John said sternly, not wanting to discuss family matters in front of a stranger. Bill Hunter looked curiously at the thin boy in simple clothes. He had heard rumors about a child who could supposedly calm wild animals, but Luke didn't impress him much. "So this is the kid who's supposed to tame bulls?" he said with a mocking smile. "Looks like just another street kid. You really believe these fairy tales, John?" "Thunder isn't a thing to be sold," Luke said quietly but firmly, staring straight into the rich man's eyes. "He's alive. He has feelings. He can be happy and sad, just like people." Hunter burst out laughing at the boy's words. "Listen, kid," he said, "a bull is just money on hooves. Nothing more, nothing less. Animals are here to serve people and make a profit. Everything else is just sentimental nonsense. Luke, go inside. Now," John snapped, seeing that the conversation was turning unpleasant. The boy obeyed, but it was clear he was deeply upset and worried. He understood the adults were discussing the fate of his best friend, and he felt helpless in a world ruled by grown-up decisions and money. That night, John couldn't sleep. He tossed and turned in bed, thinking over Hunter's offer. $75,000. That kind of money could mean years of peace, no debt, no financial stress. He could give Sarah a good education, maybe even send her to a prestigious college. The ranch could be fully modernized and become one of the most successful in the county. But on the other hand, selling Thunder would feel like admitting defeat. John had kept that bull as a symbol of his own unbreakable will. If he couldn't handle one animal, what kind of rancher was he? Thunder was his personal challenge, proof that he never gave up no matter how hard life got. Selling the bull would be admitting that his methods had failed, that he was a failure himself. Still, practical needs began to outweigh his emotions. John was responsible for his family's well-being, for Sarah's future. If the ranch went bankrupt, they could lose everything: their home, their land, their livelihood. And what good would Thunder be then if they had no roof over their heads? In the morning, after a sleepless night and painful thoughts, John finally made a decision. He called Hunter and scheduled a meeting for the next day. "Bill, I accept your offer," he said over the phone, trying to keep his voice steady. "Come get the bull tomorrow, but cash only, all of it." "Excellent, John. I knew you were a reasonable man," Hunter replied, clearly pleased. "I'll be there in the morning with the trailer and my crew. The deal's done." Hunter arrived the next day with a large livestock trailer and 3 experienced handlers who specialized in transporting cattle. They were tough-looking men with tan faces and scarred hands from working with animals. Each wore a belt with ropes, electric prods, and other tools for forcing unruly livestock into submission. Luke stood at the window of his room, watching them get ready to take away his best friend. Tears streamed down his thin cheeks, but he didn't cry out loud. After months of living with his aunt, he had learned to suffer in silence. The boy understood that he couldn't change anything in the adult world, where money and practical decisions ruled everything. Sarah approached her father with a sad expression. "Daddy, why are you selling Thunder? Luke's going to be so sad without him. Don't you see how upset he is?" "This is grown-up stuff, honey," John replied, avoiding her gaze. "Sometimes you have to make hard choices for your family. You'll understand when you're older." But deep inside, John felt he was making the wrong decision, that Thunder should stay with them. Still, his doubts were drowned out by practical concerns. The family needed the money to survive. When Hunter's men tried to force Thunder into the livestock trailer, a nightmare unfolded. The massive bull, who had been relatively calm for several months, suddenly turned back into a raging demon. Seeing unfamiliar men with ropes, sticks, and electric prods, he realized they were trying to take him away from the only place he considered home. Thunder let out a roar so loud that the windows of the house shook and birds scattered from the trees in panic. His cry was filled with rage, fear, and desperation. He charged at the nearest man with such force that the man barely managed to jump behind the fence in time. Thunder's sharp horns pierced a wooden plank as if it were made of cardboard. One of Hunter's men, a cocky handler named Red, decided to show off his skills. He entered the pen with a lasso and a shock prod, confident he could handle any bull, no matter how aggressive. But Thunder was not like the animals Red had dealt with before. The bull didn't run or try to avoid confrontation. On the contrary, he charged straight at the man with such speed and fury that Red didn't even have time to react. Thunder's horn struck his shoulder, tearing through the leather jacket and leaving a deep wound. The man fell, screaming in pain and trying to crawl to the gate. Thunder didn't calm down. He rampaged through the pen, destroying everything in his path. His heavy hooves smashed water troughs and feed bins, and his horns gouged deep grooves into the wooden walls. The bull was ready to tear the entire pen apart if it meant not being taken away from the ranch. "Get away from him!" Hunter shouted from a safe distance. "That beast will flatten the whole trailer." And indeed, when Thunder saw the transport vehicle, he charged it. His powerful hooves dented the trailer's metal walls. With a single blow from his horn, he punched a hole in the side panel the size of a basketball. "That bull's a bloody demon!" Hunter screamed, watching his expensive equipment being wrecked. "I'm not buying a murderous maniac." At that critical moment, Luke couldn't take it anymore. He ran out of the house, ignoring the adult's orders. The boy couldn't bear to watch his friend suffer. He rushed to the pen, not caring about the shouts and warnings. "Thunder, Thunder, calm down," he cried, reaching his arms out toward the furious bull. The effect was instant and astonishing. At the sound of Luke's voice, Thunder froze in the middle of his rampage. He turned to the boy, and the fury in his small red eyes melted into pain and confusion. The bull let out a low, sorrowful sound, more like a wounded animal's moan than a predator's roar. "Easy, easy," Luke said softly, slowly walking toward the fence. "I'm here now. It's okay. Nobody's going to hurt you." Thunder walked up to the barrier and laid his massive head in the boy's outstretched hands. His heavy breathing began to slow, his muscles loosened. A silent understanding passed between them, a wordless conversation only they could share. Luke gently stroked the bull's muzzle, whispering to him, and the animal listened intently to every word. Bill Hunter watched this scene with horror and disgust. He had spent a fortune on transport and professional handlers, and now his plans were falling apart before his eyes. A damaged trailer, an injured worker, and worst of all, a bull that only turned gentle in the presence of some skinny kid. "Without that kid, your bull is worthless," he snapped at John, pointing toward Luke. "It's plain as day. The moment the boy leaves, the animal turns into a wild killer again." He glanced around at the wreckage in the pen, the ruined trailer, and the bloodied handler, who was now being bandaged by the ranch hands with makeshift supplies. "If the boy doesn't come with the bull, then there's no deal," Hunter declared angrily. "I need livestock I can use, not a ticking time bomb." "Luke is not for sale," John replied firmly, and for the first time in years, his voice carried unshakable resolve. "The boy lives here. He's not going anywhere." "Then take back your damn bull," Hunter shouted in frustration. "I don't want some out-of-control killer that injures people and destroys equipment." The wealthy man called over his workers, and they quickly began packing the damaged gear into the trucks. Red, the injured handler, was helped into the pickup after his wound was cleaned and wrapped. He was pale from blood loss and shock, but the doctor said his life wasn't in danger. "You'll regret this decision, Clayton," Hunter shouted as he got into his truck. "When the bank takes your ranch for unpaid debts, you'll remember this day." The caravan of vehicles drove off, leaving behind a cloud of dust and the bitter taste of lost opportunity. John stood in the middle of the yard, watching them disappear, knowing he had just turned down $75,000, money that could have solved all his family's financial problems. He walked over to the pen, where Luke was still calming Thunder. The boy was quietly speaking to the bull, who listened intently, occasionally letting out a low moo in response. The sight stirred something deep inside the hardened rancher. Perhaps memories of his own childhood, when he too had a beloved horse he was once forced to sell due to his family's financial troubles. "I'm sorry I tried to sell you," John said to Thunder, even though he knew how odd it was to apologize to an animal. "He understands, and he forgives you," Luke replied seriously. "Thunder knows you were just trying to help your family. He's not angry at you, Mr. Clayton." As if confirming the boy's words, Thunder turned his head toward John and gave a slow nod. Maybe it was just coincidence, but to the farmer, it looked like there was understanding, even forgiveness, in the bull's eyes. From that day on, John never spoke of selling Thunder again. Instead, he began looking for other ways to solve the ranch's financial troubles. Rumors about a boy who could calm any aggressive animal had already spread across Texas and beyond. Farmers from neighboring counties began arriving at Black Rock Ranch with their troubled animals, having heard stories about Luke's remarkable gift. The first to come was a farmer named Bob Wilson from a nearby county. He brought a mare named Lightning, who had thrown off 7 riders in the past year. The horse was so wild and unpredictable that no one dared ride her anymore. One cowboy had broken his arm, another had suffered a concussion. Bob was about to have her put down, but decided to give it one last shot. Lightning was a beautiful bay mare with a flowing mane and fiery eyes. But the moment someone came near with a saddle or bridle, she turned into a demon, rearing, kicking, biting, doing everything she could to throw off a rider. Her behavior was so aggressive that even seasoned trainers refused to work with her. Luke approached her pen without fear or fuss. He sat down on the ground near the fence and started quietly talking to the horse. Lightning watched him warily, ready to bolt or strike at any moment. But something in the boy's calm voice and relaxed posture made her pause. "Hi, Lightning," Luke said gently. "I know you're scared of people. Someone probably hurt you, and now you don't trust anyone. But I'm not like that. I know what it's like to be afraid of grown-ups." The mare snorted and stepped back a few paces, but didn't run to the far end of the pen. Her ears were alert, her eyes studying the strange boy. There was no force or threat in his voice, only understanding and kindness. Luke kept talking to her, telling her about his life, how he understood her fear, and why she wanted to protect herself from those who might hurt her. He didn't make any sudden movements, didn't try to lure her with food or force her to come closer. He just sat there and spoke, letting the horse decide whether or not to trust him. After an hour, Lightning cautiously walked up to the fence and sniffed the boy's outstretched hand. Her nostrils flared as she explored the unfamiliar scent. Gradually, the tension in her body eased and her breathing became calmer. 2 hours later, the mare let Luke stroke her muzzle through the bars. She closed her eyes in pleasure as he scratched behind her ears. And an hour after that, to everyone's amazement, she was eating an apple from the boy's hand. "You can try going into the pen now," Luke told Bob Wilson, "but go slowly, no sudden moves, and make sure to talk to her. Horses like it when you talk to them." Bob couldn't believe his eyes when he managed not only to enter the pen with Lightning, but also to put a bridle on her. The mare stood quietly, occasionally glancing at Luke's hands as if looking for comfort and approval. "This can't be real," the farmer muttered, stroking the horse's neck. "I've spent thousands on trainers and vets over the past year, and no one could handle her. But a 7-year-old boy did it in just a few hours. Thank God someone was finally able to reach her," he said to John. "How much do you charge for this kind of work? I'm willing to pay anything." And so began a new chapter in the life of Black Rock Ranch. John set a fee of $500 for Luke's consultations with problem animals. The money went toward rebuilding the ranch, paying off debts, and providing a decent life for the family. But more important than the money was what everyone involved came to understand: that Luke truly had a special gift, one that could help not only animals but people too. Every weekend, farmers from all over Texas, and even from neighboring states, came to the ranch. They brought all kinds of animals: aggressive bulls, wild horses, angry dogs, stubborn pigs, and even exotic animals like llamas and alpacas. Luke worked with each case individually, finding a way to reach even the most hopeless-seeming situations. One of the most memorable cases was a bull named Devil, brought by a farmer named Mike Rodriguez from Austin. This black giant had injured 4 people in just 2 years and was considered completely unmanageable. His owner had already decided to send the bull to the slaughterhouse, but after hearing about the miracles happening at Black Rock Ranch, he decided to try one last time. Devil was even bigger than Thunder and seemed twice as aggressive. When he was unloaded from a special reinforced trailer, the bull immediately charged at the nearest fence, trying to smash it down. His roar was so loud and threatening that even John's most experienced workers backed away to a safe distance. Luke calmly approached the pen and sat on the ground near the fence, his usual position for working with aggressive animals. Devil noticed the boy and turned to face him, lowering his horns, ready to attack. His small red eyes burned with such fury, it seemed like he would tear through anything to get to his target. "Hi, Devil," Luke said softly, without trying to hide or move away. "I know you're angry at the whole world. You must be hurting inside, and you don't know how to deal with that pain." The bull snorted and stomped his hoof, raising a cloud of dust. But he didn't approach the fence. Something in the calm voice of the boy made him hesitate, torn between aggression and curiosity. "You think all people are bad," Luke went on. "Maybe they've hurt you, hit you with sticks, shocked you with electric prods, yelled at you. But I'm not like that. I understand your pain." The boy took an apple out of his pocket and placed it on the ground near the fence. Devil looked at the fruit, then back at Luke. There was still caution in his eyes, but the edge of his aggression was starting to fade. For 2 hours, Luke sat by the pen, quietly talking to the bull. He told Devil about his own life, about how he used to be afraid of adults and didn't trust people. Slowly, the tension in the air began to ease. The bull stopped pawing the ground and snorting. His breathing became more even. By evening, a miracle happened. Devil approached the fence and cautiously sniffed the apple. Then he looked at Luke, and something that looked like gratitude flickered in his eyes. Slowly, very carefully, the bull ate the fruit, never taking his eyes off the boy. "There you go," Luke smiled. "Tomorrow we'll talk some more. But for now, get some rest, big guy." The next day, Devil allowed Luke to approach the pen without showing any signs of aggression. Within a week, the boy could stroke him through the bars. And another week later, the bull calmly let his owner enter the pen, as long as Luke was nearby. Mike Rodriguez was so amazed by the transformation that he couldn't find the words to express his gratitude. "This just can't be real," he kept repeating, shaking his head. "This bull used to attack anyone who came near. Now he's gentle as a lamb. How does that boy do it?" "He has a gift," John explained, watching Luke interact with the now calm bull. "He knows what animals need. He understands their pain and fear." Word of Luke spread incredibly fast. Local newspapers began writing about him. News stations came to film the boy's work with aggressive animals. Reporters traveled from big cities just to capture his amazing ability on camera. One journalist from Dallas wrote an article titled, "The Boy Who Talks to Animals," which was reprinted in dozens of newspapers across the country. The article told the story of Luke's incredible gift and included first-hand accounts from farmers who had seen his work themselves. But for Luke himself, thunder always remained the most important part of his life. Every morning before heading to school, the boy would visit the bull with breakfast and tell him his plans for the day. Every evening, he returned to the pen to share what had happened and simply spend time with his closest friend. Thunder didn't just become calm, he became a model of gentleness and obedience. The massive bull greeted Luke with joyful lowing and followed him around the perimeter of the pen. Sometimes it truly seemed like they were having a real conversation. Luke would speak, and the bull would answer with soft sounds, as if they understood each other without words. Dr. Carter often visited the ranch specifically to observe the bond between Luke and Thunder. The experienced veterinarian tried to find a scientific explanation for what was happening, but all his theories fell apart when faced with the simple truth. The connection between the boy and the bull went beyond normal understanding of human-animal relationships. "I've studied animal behavior for 30 years, he told colleagues at veterinary conferences. "But I've never seen such a deep emotional bond between a child and a large animal. This is more than taming or training. It's a true friendship between two different species." John, too, gradually began to change under the influence of everything happening on his ranch. Watching how Luke treated animals with patience, understanding, and love, the tough rancher started to rethink his own methods. He stopped yelling at workers over small mistakes, paid more attention to the needs of the livestock, and even began talking to his horses the way Luke did. "You know, Mary," he said one evening to the elderly cook, "that boy has taught me more than I ever imagined. I used to think strength was the only way to make the world obey. Now I see that understanding and patience can be far more powerful." But the most important change happened in John's relationship with the children. The tough farmer, who had hidden his feelings for years behind a mask of sternness, slowly learned to express his love for Sarah and Luke. He started hugging them more often, asking about their day at school, even playing simple games with them. One evening, as the family sat on the porch watching the sunset, Sarah asked her father, "Daddy, are you glad you didn't sell Thunder?" John looked at his smiling children. Sarah, who had grown into a kind and caring young girl, and Luke, who had taught everyone around him to see the world differently. "Very glad, Princess," he answered, wrapping his arm around her. "Some things are worth far more than money." That same evening, John opened his desk drawer and took out the adoption papers that had been filled out weeks ago, but never signed. He looked at the official documents for a long moment, then picked up a pen and firmly signed his name. From that moment on, Luke officially became Luke Clayton, a full member of the family with all the rights of a true heir. The tough, once ruthless rancher who just a couple of years ago had wanted to kick this same homeless boy off his land, now gladly gave him his name and a father's protection.